This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberfire.com, and this is episode 288 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. I woke up one morning earlier this week and I saw a random tweet about a fantasy football trade veto. So in response, I fired off a tweet that said, "Good morning and stop vetoing trades." And it ended up getting a lot of interaction and responses. They range from people quote tweeting it and saying this to, "Well, what about this trade that happened in my league?" to, "Vetoes are how we keep the league fair for everyone." Now, I'm sure I've ranted about this topic before in the podcast, but I figured that I'd let my thoughts on the subject be known once again since it's been a topic of conversation this week. But yes, I believe that trade vetoes shouldn't be a thing in fantasy football. The only time you should veto a trade, the only time a trade shouldn't go through, is when there's clear collusion. When there's what looks to be a really lopsided trade, and you talk to both managers and you find out that yes, one of the managers did the trade to help the other one win. Outside of that, no vetoing. And here's why. First, how you feel about a trade is subjective. I saw one trade that was vetoed by someone who commented on that tweet, and the vetoed trade was James Conner and Mike Evans for DJ Chark and Todd Gurley. Now, on paper, those are two big names for one big name and a guy who wasn't drafted in most leagues. But there's absolutely no chance that you can veto that trade. I'm not predicting this to happen, so please don't take this the wrong way. And I'll talk about it more on today's show. But James Conner could be a fringe starter from here on out in some leagues. That's not outside his range of outcomes. It's not like he's produced so far this year. And Todd Gurley could end up seeing more work in the receiving game. All of a sudden, he'd be a fringe RB1. Like, we can all sit back and say that you absolutely need to take the Conner and Evans side in that trade. But it doesn't mean that we should go to the extreme and veto a trade like that. Because we don't know exactly how things are going to go down. If you're afraid that your league mates are going to create some powerhouse team through trading, then the issue isn't the trading itself. It's the league. It's how things are set up. You clearly have an issue with some of the league knowing what they're doing and some of the league not knowing what they're doing. To me, that's kind of okay, though, because it rewards the people who are actually putting in the work, who understand fantasy football. But if you don't want that, and I understand if you don't want that, but if you don't want that, don't look at trading as the problem. Don't look at vetoing as the way to save your league. Your league needs to be saved by having more competitive players in it. You may be annoyed that a lopsided trade, or what appeared to be a lopsided trade, went down in your league. But you being annoyed is partially you being jealous as well. If you got that deal done, you'd be celebrating. You'd be taking your pants off in the living room. And the idea of having a league vote on trades, that's even worse than allowing a commissioner to have the power to veto. Every team in your league is going to vote in the best interest of themselves. So you're bound to get more vetoes in that type of league than a normal one. It's a silly way to decide whether or not a trade is fair. Like, we're all adults here playing fantasy football. Adults are capable of making decisions on their own. Let an adult make a decision about their freaking fantasy football team. If you're so worried about collusion, or if you're so worried that it changes the competitiveness of your league, then you need to fix the league manager dynamic. Vetoing trades isn't the answer. So those are my feelings about vetoing. We do have some good questions this week. This is a mailbag show. But before digging into those questions, we've also got another free play on tap this week that I want to tell you guys about that's for FanDuel Podcast Network listeners. The top 3 finishers of the FanDuel free play will get NumberFire premium memberships for free. And the top 5 finishers all get a little bit of cash. The URL to enter this week's contest is fanduel.com/league/Brandon. That's the name Brandon. So fanduel.com/league/Brandon to enter for a chance to win free NumberFire premium. This first question is from @BeesChildBauer. With Melvin Gordon back, what is your expectation for Austin Ekeler? Same as last year, or do you think it's possible Ekeler remains the starter with Gordon as the complementary back? Now, I also got a question from @Velvet1965 that said, on a scale from 1 to 1,000, how stupid was Melvin Gordon's holdout? So I talked about this Melvin Gordon holdout a lot this summer and even just last week. Last week, I went over what I would do with Austin Ekeler. And my advice was to hold tight, because it really did seem like Melvin Gordon wasn't going to report until like week 10 or so. And honestly, guys, I think that was the original intent. Things just changed, and that's the unpredictable nature of these holdout situations. I'm tilted just as much as some of you are because I didn't aggressively go after Melvin Gordon this year. Now he's back, and he's obviously going to be usable in fantasy football. But the main reason I mentioned to hold Eckler was because of what you said in this question. He can still be usable with Melvin Gordon active. Last season when Gordon was active and playing, Eckler averaged about 9 touches per game. Considering the type of player that he is, that can make him a weekly flex play. But then on top of that, Melvin Gordon has played just 1 full season in his career. He hasn't been the healthiest back in the world, so there's the upside of a Gordon injury for Austin Eckler as well. And then yes, I think it's entirely possible that we see Gordon with a little bit less of a workload in favor of Eckler, given how well Eckler's done to start the season. I don't think Eckler's going to be the RB1. Let's get that idea out of our heads. But he could see more work than what he saw last year. And this is why Eckler's still fine to have on your roster. You're not going to get RB1 numbers from him without an injury, but this was the risk reward that you took when not only drafting him, but not trading him. He still had some sort of weekly floor, no matter what. And to answer your question on how stupid this holdout was, look, it's not my body. It's not my money. I would have advised him to play from the start, but it's hard for me to sit here in my mom's basement and dictate how another man should handle his life. He can do whatever he wants, and he knows more about how he feels than we do. So I can't call something like this stupid, but I would clearly have advised he not do what he ended up doing. This next question is from @FFTylerO. What are some tips and tricks that you employ to stay successful while managing multiple 5+ fantasy teams? Yeah, so I have many leagues that I play in each year, and the thing that's helped me most is bookmarks, like internet browser bookmarks. That way I can go through each league in a processed way, and that way I know that I won't forget to check one of my leagues. I do think it's a little bit different for me because I'm giving advice as my job. So a lot of the adding and dropping and proposing of trades is a little bit easier for me. But the more that you can get into a rhythm with how you do all of those things, the more processed you can be, the better you'll be at managing all of these teams. This next question is from @Pel316. What is your approach when starting 0-3? You've always got to see if your team is really bad or if it's just gotten unlucky. And the same can be said for undefeated teams too. Is your team actually good or have you just gotten lucky? If your 0-3 team actually needs help, then you need to make a move. You have to be willing to give up some of your best pieces. People always complain that no one trades in their league, but it's likely because managers are afraid of parting with their best players. You have the luxury of not letting go of top players when you're undefeated and your team is stacked. But at 0-3, you have to be willing to move your studs. It's usually the only way to climb out of a hole. This next question says, hold or sell Watkins. Good to have a piece of the Chiefs offense, but he's underperforming and I feel I have to start him every week. The thing is, you're also selling him at a low point. And as I talked about on this week's matchup show, he's in a great matchup against the Lions, who have been terrible against wide receivers in the slot this year. But not only that, if you listen to this show during the summer, I had Sammy Watkins as a player to target this year because when he was healthy last season, he was really good. When he was healthy last year, he averaged just 0.4 fewer targets per game than Tyreek Hill. He's going to still see a lot of work even when Tyreek Hill is back. So I wouldn't go selling him after a couple of down games, especially with a plus matchup this week. This next question is from @RossVerba. Will James Conner turn this season around with an easier rush defense schedule coming up? Yeah, so let's take a look at James Conner's production and peripheral numbers to date. So far this year, he's ranked as the RB29, the RB18, and the RB38 in weekly PPR scoring. Honestly, it's a lot better than I expected given how he seemed to have performed. But his peripheral numbers are good. He ranks 9th in the NFL in team running back attempt share. He's 15th in target share at running back. Those two things combined means he'd hypothetically be an RB1, likely a lower end RB1. But the issue is that the Steelers haven't been able to move the ball very well. Pittsburgh ranks 3rd worst in yards per drive to start the year, and they've scored on 28.6% of those drives, which is easily a bottom 10 number. So I guess one way that you could view Conner is that things can't get much worse. And I'd agree with that. Week 1 was a dumpster fire. Week 2 saw a quarterback change mid-game. And week 3 was a road game with that quarterback getting his first start. And the Steelers, if you watch that game, the Steelers played that offense very, very conservatively. So I do think, given the peripherals, that James Conner is going to turn his season around, at least relatively speaking. When you compare to how he's played at the beginning of the season, he should be better. The problem is that part of the allure with James Conner was the goal line work that he would see and the touchdown upside that could come from that. Without Ben Roethlisberger, I don't know if that's quite there. So I don't know if the schedule is the reason that I would buy Connor. It's just really the fact that he's got good peripherals and the Steelers realistically should only get better. That's why, at least compared to how he started the season, I do think that he will turn things around. This next question is from @S.Wood. Robbie Anderson played 100% of the Jets' snaps this past week, and no one stepped up in Darnold's absence. With Darnold's return imminent, would you buy Robbie Anderson stock while it's really low? So my thing with these ideas is that they're not bad in theory, but everyone knows that Sam Darnold is going to come back. So I guess it's not a terrible idea to shoot a low ball offer out there and see if the Robbie Anderson manager bites. But I would imagine most people understand why Anderson and the other Jets players aren't performing. The same could be said for Jamison Crowder too. I could feel the tilt in this next question. I could feel it. It's from @TroyDelivers. It says, Sony Michel. But last year's playoff run was magical. Don't you remember? Please, somebody remember, LOL. I got Belichicked, didn't I? Please save me with some sort of fake positivity. I will accept anything at this point. I mean, things are bad for Michel. There's no doubt about it. But if you want something positive to latch onto, it could be that the Patriots just want to save him for more important games, for later in the season. That they faced the Jets last week and they used Burkhead not just because he's more versatile with James White not in the lineup, but because New England knew that their chance of winning was pretty strong. So they didn't want to risk Sony Michel getting hurt. Michel's also going to lead the team in goal line carries, and they should score a lot of points. So those are my positive notes on Sony Michel right now. But yes, it is a bad situation. This next question says, what is the right strategy in carrying handcuff running backs? Do players like Jalen Samuels and Tony Pollard have more seasonal value as opposed to carrying a wide receiver who is at best a 3 or a 4? I'd argue yes. I'm not one who drafts handcuffs because we think we know a lot more than we do before a season starts. But as the season progresses and we get more information on who's good and who isn't, it's easier to hold on to handcuffs. So players like Pollard and Samuels right now, depending on what your team needs, they're solid stashes, especially Pollard. But it does depend on team need. Like if you're rotating wide receivers based on matchup or something, then you have less room for a straight up stash. So my answer is that yes, in most cases, stashing high upside players makes more sense than stashing high floor ones. I would rather be stashing Tony Pollard than someone like Corey Davis right now. This last question is from @JoeNeely. What the hell do we do with Todd Gurley? Can you play him in week 4? Can't trade him, can't drop him. Todd Gurley was a fade for me this year. And that's not me patting myself on the back because I've had plenty of misses, you guys. I'm just prefacing this so that you guys know that I'm not sitting here with take lock. Gurley hasn't been great, and there are plenty of reasons to be worried even when you just watch him and just watch him try to cut on a football field. But let's not completely overstate how bad he's been. He's been the RB26 through 3 weeks. In most league formats, you can still play the 26th best running back in fantasy football. He's still seen about 68% of his team's running back touches, and he has a couple of goal line looks. The Rams offense just hasn't been that great this year, or at least as good as it's been with Sean McVay. And as I talked about in my 10 Trends episode earlier this week, they've targeted their running backs in the passing game at the lowest rate in the league. So what this means is that Gurley's sort of Sony Michel West. But I'd argue that there's more potential for him right now than someone like Sony Michel because the Rams have more room for growth offensively. And we at least know Gurley is a capable pass catcher who's seen a high target share in the past. Now that's me doing my best to give Gurley a positive spin. I do think that people are sort of overstating his demise because it's not like he's been totally worthless. But no, I wouldn't go out trying to buy him either. This could just be his new reality. And honestly, evidence all offseason suggested that this would be his new reality. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And if you're not following me on Twitter, I'm on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and good luck in Week 4.